Hey everyone, so today's video is actually going to be a follow-up from yesterday's, where we were talking about legendaries to allocate your legendary book resources to. Today we're following that up with the epics. So the nice thing about epics is the epic books are much easier to come by. There still isn't enough of them, but they are easier to come by than the legendary books. So most events and rallies end up having these epic books as rewards. They're usually the very last one. Like here in this gear rally, this is your last reward, one of those books. There are times where these rallies or events do not have books as a reward. I would highly recommend that you guys don't waste resources on those events. If you're trying to maximize efficiency on your account. Now, if you have resources to burn or whatever, yeah, just do whatever, rally or event you want to do. But if you're limited in the amount of resources you have, you should really prioritize getting books because they are the thing that is going to progress your account the most. So getting into the epics, the nice thing about this video versus yesterday's video on legendaries, I have a clear-cut answer for everyone on who you should book first. And that's Nathalia. Now, some people might argue this, and maybe some of the arguments are valid, but I truly think Nathalia is the best person to book first from an epic. She's one of the hardest hitting characters in the entire game. That includes legendaries. So she's one of the hardest hitting epics. She gets around a lot of different mechanics in the game because her effects are considered single target damage dealing effects, even though they can hit multiple characters. So this gets around heroes like Jonathan, who's very prevalent in the meta. So she's a benefit there. And on top of that, she is one of the most used characters in dungeon progression. And she's like a key character for the Ash dungeon, right? So she's used in these three dungeons, Ash, Queen, and Witch, which I've talked about in other videos separately, that these are the three dungeons that you definitely want to farm the most. And Nathalia is a key piece in all of those. She might not be part of the teams that are the absolute fastest, but she's still a part of teams that are quite fast and the most consistent. So that's why, in my opinion, she is the clear-cut favorite on who you should book first from an epic standpoint. I booked mine first whenever epic books, whenever the book system first came out, she was the first one that I booked as well. So she is 100% the clear-cut favorite on who to book first. The other considerations on who to book as well are Antinua, who's also a key piece in speed dungeon runs. She's also very good in bounties, and she's a decent character for Void Tower Hard. And even in some cases, if built right, she can be used in PvP. Or Baron. So Baron is also a great wave clear in dungeons. After the waves, though, like once you get to the boss, she's kind of useless, but still very strong in dungeons. The thing to note about Baron versus Antinua or Nathalia, she does need to have Ascension 5 to get her effect, and this trait is really important to her damage output. So the likelihood of having 6 Barons before you have 3 Nathalias is probably unlikely. But Baron, she will scale better than Antinua or Nathalia going throughout the game because, as I've mentioned in other videos, Baron is one of the top tier nukers in the entire meta, and she's an epic, and I use her to this day. There's plenty of top tier arena players that use Baron as their damage dealer, so that shows you how good she is. So Antinua, Baron, and Nathalia are all great choices for the very first epic that you should be prioritizing, but I think the favorite for sure is Nathalia. So I did just want to mention that. because I really didn't give you a clear favorite on who to get or who to book first as a legendary, but hopefully the answer of Epic helped you today. Okay. So, going through all of the epics here, Alistar. So, this is kind of a fairly new light champion. It says he does control, like he's not an attack champion, but he dishes out a lot of damage. I've only heard this through the grapevine. I don't have one built myself, so this is all kind of subjective. But he does like a bunch of different attacks. He has, this ability that the more this ultimate is used, which goes hand in hand with his trait, he deserves a whole video by himself to explain him. But he is a decent option as a damage dealer for books. So Alistar is a nice option to get books, especially in the PvP meta. I don't know if he's viable in dungeons. The dungeon teams are kind of set, but from a PvP perspective, Alistar is a nice choice to book. So we had a video on Kalana not too long ago. I think it was like 2 or 3 days ago. She's a really good debuffer, but she is a support character, and like I said, most support characters don't need books. You can book her out for the additional speed that you get on that physique trait, but I don't think, I know for sure that she really doesn't need 15 books put in her. You should put them in other areas. So Lightwing Zac. Lightwing Zac actually used to be a real menace in the meta. This is way back when. He's since fallen off, but he is still an okay character. I know some people that do use him. If you don't have enough damage, he can become a bit of a menace. And he definitely benefits from books because he needs to be tanky as well as do decent damage. So I would say Lightwing Zac is a viable option, but there are better heroes out there to use resources on if you have them. So Celestial Cain is, again, one of those support characters. He removes debuffs. He gives your whole team invincible. He's a really underrated character, in my opinion, to be honest. But as of now, he hasn't really taken any kind of place in the meta. People like Jocasta or Mary or even this new hero kind of outshine him currently. So Tucker. Tucker is also one of the newer epics. A lot of people had some high hopes for him. He does this damage reflection, which scales off of his maximum health. Now, I don't know what the reflection is. The problem is in order for him to be useful at all, he has to put this up. He has to put this damage reflection buff up. And as you can see, he's pretty slow. And on top of that, he doesn't have any kind of immunity, to crowd control. Like if he gets stunned or frozen or anything like that, his kit does nothing for him to get around that stuff. So this person does need books in order to achieve the goal that he's trying to do. He's supposed to be very tanky. He's supposed to heal. So he needs all of the health and defense stats and all of that he needs. But right now, there's not enough data on him to see if he's good enough in the meta or not. So I would hold tight on not booking Tucker. So Lunar Melissa used to be a really meta champion because she puts up these AoE taunts. She was one of the few people in the game, and still kind of is, to be able to do this effect. The problem is she is kind of slow, and speed is king right now in the PvP meta. She's not really a dungeon champion. She is used in guild versus environment a little bit on specific little nodes, but overall she does not need any books. My Lunar Melissa is actually still at level 50, so she's useful there, but definitely not worth books. I don't think she's PvP relevant. So Sacred Windstrex, I actually pulled my first copy of her during this last banner, and I've got high hopes for her. So Sacred Windstrex is kind of like she is an epic light version of Brand, the fire legendary that we were talking about yesterday, where she puts up these shields based on her max health, which is exactly like Brand, but she does this duration increase of positive effects to your team, which is kind of neat. So she's a great support hero. She puts up damage up on everybody and also cleanses some of their debuffs. Really good support hero. Very fast. So she's got a lot of things going for her. She does benefit from books, being able to get that additional speed and have her health increased to make her shield stronger. So she is a viable support hero for books. So she is a very nice option and one of the few supports that probably warrant books. Royce is another one that I'm really excited about but have yet to pull, so that's a bit of a bummer. But he's also a cleanser. He has control immunity on just his normal trait, which is really cool. And then whenever your allies get some kind of control effect, right? So that's stun, taunt, silence. He immediately gets a bonus turn, and then he cleanses one of those effects from your team members, and then he himself gains defense up, and his damage scales off of defense. So Royce is a very nice option for books, but the true benefit of Royce is there's multiple ways that you can build him. You can build him as a damage dealer who's going to go first no matter how slow he is whenever there's a control ability, because he will immediately grant himself a bonus turn whenever that happens. So if Aurea is in your opponent's defense or picked in RTA, even if he's slow, he'll go to the top of the order. And then he has a pretty hard-hitting ultimate. His damage scales on his defense, so he benefits from all of those books, the attack, health, and defense. So yeah, he's a really cool option. I'm hoping to pull one soon, and then I will for sure make a video on him because he is PvP relevant and a nice unit in RTA. But again, haven't pulled him yet, so sadly I can't do an in-depth video. So Augustine just got a buff, and he's a one-of-a-kind unit. He has this splash damage, and he does additional damage to light targets, which could be really, really good against specific heroes in the meta. I'm just trying to find the right way to build him, but he is book viable. He has this really cool trait where he counterattacks whenever he gets hit by non-critical damage. And there's plenty of people in the meta that actually don't do non-critical damage. That do non-critical damage. That sentence was confusing, sorry. So the main ones are like Divine Yolanda, Alicia, who I've talked about in her own video, like top tier arena unit. Anytime she would hit Augustine, he would counterattack against Alicia, which is really cool. I don't know if he can be strong enough to withstand a hit from Divine Yolanda. If he did, though, he would counterattack against her, do 100% more damage, and then splash damage on what that was to all of the other enemies. That could be really deadly, but I don't know if he would be tanky enough to survive that hit, because there's no way to make him strong enough, like with Dragon Scale gear, because that only cares about critical hits. So it's interesting. Now, Augustine, I will say, is a god in guild versus environment, especially against like the Lightwing Zac tiles. He's amazing there. But I do think he's a viable option for PvP. I just have other heroes that I've been prioritizing over him. But he is an interesting case, and I would like to build him and test him in PvP. But right now, there's not enough books for me to really warrant booking him right now. So Aurea. Aurea might be the best light or dark epic in the game. They're starting to put out a bunch of counters to her trait, which is good. I mean, her trait, being able to taunt two people for free is kind of bonkers on an epic. I mean, it's nice that they give us such strong epics to play. But yeah, it was kind of an issue. So the fact that they're putting out so many counters to her is pretty cool. But definitely top tier. She has self-sustain on her ultimate, where anytime she's hit, she heals back some damage, she removes positive effects, multiple taunts. She's a real nuisance. And a lot of times she'll be banned over other legendaries. So, great unit. She probably is worth some books to give her some additional speed and tankiness to keep taunting. She also puts up unhealable on her basic, which is really relevant in the meta as well, with certain heroes running around, like Afroween, who we've talked about, that water hero who's just crazy good. Holy Armored Virgil. But I still think that you want to use your epic books on damage dealers because Aurea is still extremely serviceable without any books. So Marion Shadowblood is known as kind of a guild boss specialist, but I do think she has some viability in PvP. She has some nice mastery book options where she gets True Strike, which allows you to ignore defense and only build your heroes at 60% crit rate with higher attack. And she already comes with a lot of speed, and she makes even your support heroes deal damage because she can join attack. So very interesting character. The nice thing is most of the people will be booking her anyway for guild boss damage because she is the best damage dealer in guild boss out of anyone out there. So to transform her into a PvP character is a viable option. So I made a dedicated video on Jabez. Jabez is a counter to a lot of really, really strong heroes in this game. He's a counter to Jonathan, who is a top-tier epic. He is a counter to Sharksoul Andre, which is a top-tier dark legendary hero. He's a top-tier counter to Ashlyn, top-tier wood hero. Like, the list goes on. And on top of that, even if none of those heroes are in an arena team, he just does so much damage against, like, tank heroes like Mathasia, or Brands, or Florence, like all of these niche kind of tank heroes that are just built for support. Jabez can one-shot them. So he's fully booked on my account. I think he's totally worth it. I have not regretted it. He is only used in PvP, though. So if you're trying to maximize resources for PvP and PvE, hold off on Jabez. But if you're PvP focused, I think he is one of the top epics to book for sure. So we already talked about Antinua, great dungeon hero for sure, and she has her uses in PvP, but she's going to take specific setups because in order to maximize her damage, she's going to be run fairly slow, just above 200 speed or something like that, and it's just not going to be enough to cut it. So you'll have to pair her with somebody that can give her an instant turn. So Vance is also a very good character. He gains additional turns if your opponent buffs themselves, which can be a real pain in the butt. They actually nerfed Vance. Vance was extremely strong. He would steal buffs. He would do a bunch of bonus attacks, and then he got a little too strong. I think with all of the broken characters in the game, though, he could have stayed where he is, and he would have been more viable. He's still pretty good in PvP. He's just more niche now than he was like a serviceable first pick. You used to like first pick Vance or even pre-ban Vance in RTA. But since his nerf, he's a little more situational. He's a decent damage dealer, for wood. If he got some more attack or something like that, he'd probably be more viable. But as you can see, he's got really nice speed, so he can kind of he can snipe some quick water damage dealers like Andre. But right now, I think there are better options at wood like Baron over Vance. So Edicris used to be the king of Void Tower Hard. He used to be a really good PvP unit. He's kind of fallen off the map a little bit. They did nerf the amount of times his bonus attack, would trigger off of his trait, and on top of that, he's kind of slow. There are plenty of buffs in the meta, but he just hasn't seen any kind of use. I don't know why. He seems serviceable, but I guess at the same time, the slowness of his base speed, along with the RNG of seeing if he'll do bonus attacks, on top of a couple of these buffs that have now gotten a buff themselves where they can't be removed, maybe all ties into why Edicris isn't really used that much anymore. So Hitoshi is one of the free characters that you get when you first start out this game. Great epic hero. If you don't pull Antinua, Baron, or Nathalia, Hitoshi is a viable option to book as well, because he's just a great hero in adventure. He gets this bonus crit rate at 30%, which makes him very, very easy to build. Especially in the early game, it's hard to get all of those stats and try and get 100% crit rate. So he is definitely the most one of the more friendly units to build. And if you put books into him, his damage can scale really well. He'll get additional crit rate, which makes him even easier to build. And the nice thing is his kit is still useful in Queen of Tides, which is a key dungeon for account progression. So Hitoshi is a viable option for someone outside of PvP to be booked, because he has such great dungeon progression and adventure progression. As you can see, his speed's a little low, which makes him not a great option in PvP, and most heroes in PvP are just too tanky for what Hitoshi's kit can give him. So Silent is one of the characters that wins, the award for most annoying in this game. She has this RNG trait that reduces damage or can just nullify it in general, which is really dumb design. I hate stuff like this, but whatever. She's a great support hero. She does stuns, she does counterattacks, defense down, accuracy down, attack down. She's all over the board with debuffs. A great support hero, but she does not need books to be viable. So Zatlux used to be the premier starter champion, but then they released Hitoshi. So Zatlux has fallen off the map. In general, everything he does, I think Hitoshi does better. He is still really good in faction wars for the Dragon Scale Marsh. I don't know. Whatever faction he's a part of. He's really good for farming glyphs. So I guess that is one thing, but he's not relevant in PvP. And he's not really used anymore in dungeons because of Hitoshi. So Orchi. Orchi's a pretty unique character. I started booking Orchi and I stopped. I think maybe I'm just not utilizing him very well, but he has this cool counterattack that does a bunch of damage based on the damage he took, and he gives himself sustain on just on his trait. He takes reduced damage. So he's a really cool character, grants himself bonus attacks, cleanses any negative effects from him, and heals. So he's a very, very viable option for PvP, and he's definitely worth books. I haven't found a great build for him yet, but I have been beaten pretty bad by some people in RTA with him. So viable character for books as well. Baron, I've already mentioned. She is an amazing epic. She is a legendary hero in an epic skin. So if you're looking for anybody PvP related, Baron is probably your very first choice for epic books if you're PvP focused over Nathalia. So Winstrix used to be the premier character in Arena a long time ago, because she gives your entire team speed up 2 at that, 50 speed, and then also attack up. This is fairly counterable nowadays with all of the characters that like counterattack on opponents buffing themselves and yada yada yada. But if you're new to the game and you pull a Windstreak, she's going to be great for the early arena, being able to increase the speed of your heroes. She does also have very nice speed, very nice base speed for her stats, and her books give her some speed. So if you're trying to win speed races, she might be a decent choice to put 1 or 2 books in to see if you can hit that plus 15 speed. But other than that, I don't think she's really needed to book. I still have mine at 50. I always kept her at 50. I never really needed a reason to book her. So, Crixus. Crixus is a character that I started to book, and I really wish I didn't. His damage output just isn't there. He does 220% damage, and then with a chance to launch this additional damage dealing effect on his trait, which does 200% more. So his ultimate can do 440%, technically. The problem is his trait only ignores damage reduction effects. It doesn't ignore defense or death immunity or invincible or anything like that. So it's kind of useless. And on top of that, his attack stat is just too low. You want to build him fast. So the faster he gets, the more likely his trait is to activate to do that shattering blow effect. But the problem is whenever you're building him for the speed, his attack really suffers. So he's quite stat hungry, and I don't have the gear that really makes him useful. So he's been a bit of a waste. The one thing I will say, though, in silver lining, is his shattering blow. There's been a couple different people that have damage reduction effects just in their kit in general, except from, this used to tie into buffs, but there's people that just have reduced damage on their abilities now. So that is one thing to think about, but I think his kit just needs a little bit more, or his base stats need to be updated before you book Crixus. Do not waste your books on Crixus. Okubi, I've never found any use for this person. Some people use him in Guild versus Environment. Some use him in a dungeon or two. He's not worth the books. Apina is kind of like Abaddon, which is a dark hero, for PvE and Guild versus Environment, stuff like that. She's not a character that is used in dungeons. So I do not use books on Apina, in my opinion. So Gajar. Gajar is used in Gemini Dragon. He's a poison exploder. He's actually a really cool character, but he is purely a dungeon specialist. He's used in like one dungeon, so yeah, no books needed. Kain is a support hero. He takes some damage that your allies would take. He can stun, apply defense down. He's not really a useful character. He's one of the original characters in the game, so his kit is a little outdated. He's just not really useful anywhere, so yes, no books. Arundel, he is a joint attacker, which is pretty cool. He joint attacks anytime somebody has a critical strike. So his kit's pretty interesting. It's unique, but at the same time, he just doesn't do enough to be viable anywhere. He used to be a guild boss champion, and he's since fallen off. So no books there either. So Urzag is one that I've been thinking about booking just because he's very good against tanks, and a lot of the meta is water right now. The problem is his damage scales with his base attack versus the opponent's base attack, and a lot of the water heroes in the meta have high attack stats, so I don't think he'll do a whole lot of damage. So I'm not willing to waste epic books just for a trial. And because there's no way to get your epic books back, like if you make a mistake booking a hero, he's just not worth the risk for me. Hugh's a pretty interesting character. He has an extremely high base speed. He does counterattacks based on the difference of his speed versus the enemy that's attacking him. He puts an AoE speed down on everybody, which is really cool. And then his ultimate grants himself damage reduction, and it ignores 50% of the enemy's defense. The problem is he has the same issues as Crixus, where you want him very fast, and then when you do that, his attack stat is just a little bit too low to take advantage of this ignore 50% of enemies' defense. So if he does get a little bit of a buff in either his stats, or they increase this multiplier by like an additional 100% or something like that, he could be a specialist to take out opposing Neros. So I'd keep an eye out for Hugh, but right now I do not think he is worth books. So Ricard is actually a really, really good tank unit that can deal damage. He used to be a specialist for Lydia because his ultimate cannot miss, right? Can't be dodged. And it does damage equal to true damage based on everyone that's alive. It's a really interesting effect. He's a really good tank. He has self-sustain where he gives himself, he heals himself, grants himself a big shield. He's a really good character, but he's specifically used in tank teams. If he goes unchecked, he can be a real menace. The problem is people like Alicia and Giranol exist in the meta, so he's really only a counter pick if your opponent hasn't really chosen those two heroes. But definitely worth the books. I mean, he benefits from extremely high health. He can do some decent damage with the additional attack that you're building on him. So Ricard is a viable option for books. Okay, so we're already at 30 minutes. I'm going to speed this up a little bit. From a fire perspective, Thomas is a counter-attacker that has possibility of stun. I have heard that he does decent amounts of damage, but the problem is the only true meta heroes right now for Wood are Baron, who he is good against, and Ashlyn, who he is not good against, because Ashlyn can just stun him. So I don't think he's worth your books. Zachary used to be an elite, actually, and they upgraded him to epic. So if you booked your Zachary with elite books before he got turned into an epic, congratulations. He's actually a pretty good damage dealer. He does like AoE bonus attacks whenever somebody falls below or gets killed, I think. So he's like a fire version, an epic fire version of Ciara, which is pretty unique. But again, he kind of suffers the same fate as other fire heroes, where the wood heroes in the meta are kind of specific. So I don't think he's worth your books. Melisa is actually really, really good. She's used for her trait here, which gives her a whole bunch of speed, attack, and crit damage at the beginning of the round in the battle. She falls off as the match goes on, so she's used in high damage dealing teams that are supposed to win, on the very first turns. Because of that, she really doesn't need books, but if you do put books into her, she can be kind of a menace. I don't think that she should be your first choice, but if you're looking for someone to fill a role to snipe opposing like fast damage dealers or crowd control people like Garnets or Aubrey's, I think she's a really nice option to counter there, and she will need books to do enough damage to those characters. But if you're looking for that specific role, Melisa is your gal. Aurak is an okay fire damage dealer. He does true damage, bonus attacks, things like that, but he's really not PvP meta. So I would not use him. He was used in Tulpa for a little bit, but that dungeon's really not worth it, and you can do it with a free synthesis hero nowadays, so keep Aurak without books. Scarlet is purely a PvE hero. She's used in Guild Boss and Guild versus Environment. Very good hero there, but I don't think she's worth the books unless that is something that you want to prioritize. Trista is really good. Trista is a Ignite hero that also stuns people. I've seen her do a lot of damage as well. I don't think she's truly a PvP hero. Not to say that she can't be used there, but I think if you're going to use books on a fire damage dealer, I think you're better off using it like on a Melisa or something like that. So Trista is a viable option for books for sure, but I think other people fill her role better that are maybe faster and whatnot. But if they continue releasing Ignite heroes, maybe more AoE Ignite heroes, she could be a viable option in PvP. So Jacob is like the guild boss, guild versus environment, like god, right? He does all of these bonus attacks and stuff like that. And he's most likely going to be booked at some time for people because he's useful in all of the guild-related content, but he is not a PvP hero. So he will get books eventually, but obviously for PvP, you shouldn't waste that on him. So Borden. Now, I really like Borden. He's extremely relevant in the meta, like his kit, but I think he's just a little too squishy. He does this ultimate ability that ignores invincible and death immunity, which is huge against Light Nick and Dark Nick, and they're very prevalent in the meta. So he's an amazing counter to them. The problem is you have to deal enough damage to those heroes and then have Borden live and then have Borden go. So a lot of situations that need to happen in order for Borden to do his thing. I think he's just too situational. He's not really worth the books. I think if you just build him extremely tanky with decent gear, he can do his job without books. So Viola's pretty cool too. She has a bunch of unique debuffs like focus, resistance down. She heals people, does max damage, true damage, which is pretty unique to a couple heroes in the game. And then she can stun people on her trait. So I'm sure there's a place in PvP for her, but with her being a support hero, already decent speed, I don't think she needs books. I think she can be useful without. So Aramo is the Fire Orchie. I haven't built this guy yet. I did pull him, but he does similar things to the other Orchie. I think he is supposed to be a PvP hero, but I have not taken the time to build him, so I can't tell you if he's useful or not. All I can say is Orchie is book viable for PvP, so I'm assuming Aramo is as well. So Philidia is another PvE hero, specific hero. Zulus has made a video on her. She's really, really good for Ignite strategies with Bachelard and Abaddon. So she's kind of top tier for PvE content. So if you're looking for reasons to do that, she might be a viable book option, but for PvP, she's not really useful. Bruzak. Bruzak is a really good arena hero, and I've been countered by this hero a couple of times. He's got a lot of great health and defense already. He is a support hero. I'm sure books help him stay alive and be tanky, but at the same time, because he's that support hero, I think he can get away with just good gear and making him level 70. So Hassel is also very good in the PvP meta. He gives speed up and attack up to heroes with bonus turns and things like that. He is countered by Jabez, which is a very prevalent unit in the PvP meta. And also Galeno, who we'll talk about here once we get to water. So you do need to be careful about picking Hassel. Support hero. I will say, though, because his base speed is so low, his very first physique trait in his mastery trait allows him 15% speed. If you're going to utilize Hassel in your PvP strategy, you might want to try and get that first book in physique. Harbeg, completely useless everywhere. Do not book him. Same thing with Mognar, also terrible basically everywhere. Esrina is a PvE hero. She scales off of ignites, like based on how many ignites someone has, her damage scales off of that, I think, with her special ability. Yeah, so you don't need to book her. I think she's a very viable unit without books in the PvE meta. All right, and now moving on to water. Okay, so Santis, she used to be, Queen of Dungeons with Gangello, but as I mentioned in the legendary video, the Hell 4 stages now have immunity to poison except Gemini Dragon, which she is still a top tier unit, but you do not need any books in here. In her, you just need to hit speed requirements and maybe some health. So no books needed. We already talked about Nathalia, top tier hero. Definitely put books into her, and most likely the very first epic U book. Andre is an amazing epic hero. Right now, I have not used him a whole lot, but he's still very viable. You just need to build him a little differently. He needs a little bit of focus nowadays because the heroes he was good against that removed some buffs, they now are unremovable. So Andre needs high speed, which as you can see, his speed is really low, but his base attack is high. So you can forfeit some attack to make his speed higher. He does a really high multiplier on his ultimate ability, removes positive effects and puts up no positive effects, which is really key in the meta. And then on top of that, he can't have any kind of negative stat on him, which is really cool. He's kind of legendary-esque in an epic skin like Baron, so really great hero, top-tier PvP hero, especially water, and I think he's definitely worth books. Hakron is a great hero in PvP. He makes all of your tanks even stronger. He's definitely worth a couple books. His defense is very high, and he distributes his defense to the rest of your team. So I have my Hakron partially booked. His abilities don't really do anything for him, so if you avoid the ability tree, you're in pretty good shape. And if you just hit maybe 6 or 7 books on the gear tree and the physique tree, that's a great place to stop for Hakron, but he is worth some books. Lodric's okay. He doesn't do enough damage, but he counterattacks anytime he has a control effect, which has become more prevalent in the meta. So I don't know if he's a viable option or not. On paper, he seems to be, but like I said, with epic books being so rare, even though they are giving out more than legendary books, right now, for me, he's not worth the risk. Kyle's really, really interesting character. I think he has the highest base speed in the game, to be honest. And he mimics somebody, right? He turns into that hero. So this is a really good hero to pick in RTA whenever your opponent has like a fast support hero like Halia or something like that, where you want to take their moves. The problem with Kyle is he does not steal their stats. So if he transforms into a damage dealer, his damage dealing stats aren't very high, so he won't do any damage. You need him to be a specific pick, but he probably is worth some books just for the additional speed because you want him to go first. But I would say he's only worth that top physique mastery book if you can land it. Helmar is a bleed-specific comp hero, only in PvE, not really a PvP champion, so no books there. William he used to be one of the main heroes for dungeons. He's since fallen off since more and more characters have been released, so he's not really worth books. Mila is a freeze hero, which could be good in PvP, but her speed is really low. And Tia, who is a free legendary hero, does her job better, so do not waste books on her. Jonathan, we've already talked about. I think he is 100% worth the books. Get his health as high as possible. It also allows him to do a little bit of damage. So definitely a viable option for your books with Jonathan. Galeno is another one of those newer epics that was released that counters Hassel, which we just talked about, and Halia. Grants himself an extra turn. You do need to watch out for Jabez. He gets countered by Jabez pretty hard, but he's got nice base speed and he does an AoE silence. So putting in some books to get his speed up is really nice. And then even boosting his survivability stats to maybe survive a Jabez counterattack is a viable option. But Galeno is one of those few support heroes that I think is probably worth some books. Now, Bocce, I'm I'm eventually going to make a dedicated video on Bocce because I'm going to book him here really shortly. He came out of nowhere. A lot of people thought he was going to be bad because on his trait, he has this attack that does 80% damage to somebody, and it ignores 100% of their defense. Now, ignoring 100% of defense is huge, but when people first saw this damage multiplier of 80%, I think people were like, even myself, I was like, that's just not enough damage. But this guy can one-shot like entire teams. It's nuts. So I will be making a dedicated video on Bocce, but he's become really, really relevant in the PvP meta and definitely worth books just from what I've seen from other people, and I guarantee I won't regret the books that I put into Bocce, and that video will be coming out probably in 3 weeks, I'm guessing, once I get enough books. Rosalind is just a PvE hero. She is pretty good. She does bonus attacks. She ignores some defense, I believe. Yeah, 60% of the target's defense. So she's a really cool character and a solid character, but she does not need books for PvP. And I'm not sure if she deserves books for PvE either. Noella is kind of similar to Rosalind. She puts defense down 2. She removes effects from herself, yada, yada, yada. She's a PvE hero, so no books there. Timon's one of the newer water epics out there. He does like additional attacks, and he keeps hitting people with his ultimate ability, but the damage does decrease. So he's a very viable option for stun sets, but I think he's more of a PvE hero than he is for PvP. Hazel is a unique character. She used to not do enough, but then they recently buffed her where she revives someone. So Hazel's actually a viable character in PvP, but for me, I think there's just too many epics that I want to book before her, but I think she does benefit from books just to make her survivability high enough. So she is an option, but I think you should prioritize your damage dealers. Virgil has kind of fallen off the map. He was a speedster that put silence on everybody, but with Galeno out, I think he's no longer worth it, so I would not put epic books in him. And then our last one is Hori. So Hori is like the brother of Bocce. He does similar things where he does bonus attacks, but his trait is much worse. It doesn't ignore any kind of defense. So even though his multiplier is higher, he's just definitely nowhere as good as Bocce. So that's it, guys. That's the epic review, and it's somehow longer than the legendary one. So again, thanks for sticking around this whole time and supporting the channel. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'll catch you later.